And do you see the big screen, by the way, or the small screen?
It is a big one.
Perfect. Okay, so then let me welcome you to today's webinar on building up your thesis with mirroring. And we hope that as a learning outcome, you will understand how mirroring can support you in your research and thesis development. And if you get a hang to it and want to experiment further how mirroring works, we do have a writing up instruction. You see this where we have some hands-on activities where you can test it, or you might also want to look into some of our workshops where we offer it either flexible on a one-on-one base or at a half-day training session. And there specifically, we will look into the following. So what is mirroring about, first of all, but also how mirroring as a gradual process allows you to step-by-step build up your thesis. And mirroring is actually nothing, as we will see in today's webinar, that is something we came up with, but it's a century-old concept. So we also will show you where and how it elsewise can support you in your research. There are a number of angles. And what could be mirrored through the thesis? This will be a very hands-on practical activity where we look into how an example thesis from one of our alumni has been evolving over a 5 years time frame. And then we also see what could be mirrored, and in the closing, there would be a debriefing discussion where you can ask any questions. So with this, let us start. What is mirroring all about? So it's a systematic approach to see how the different parts of the thesis relate to each other. And it can serve you as a tool to build up consistency across the thesis. And it also can be used as an analytical framework at the same time and assist you in building up the boundaries to understand what is in your thesis and not. And that, on the other hand, can improve your communication skills and tell others what is your research about, what is it not about, and to bring out the key facts. And we see that mirroring allows for a systematic comparison of the different parts of your thesis and how the different parts relate to each other. And this then also allows you to detect inconsistencies and redundancies, and that we will now see very practically in a number of examples that we will work through in the remaining webinar. Now, let's take this as an example table of content of a mini thesis, sort of. A thesis about music. Right? You have the typical chapters that each thesis will more or less have. 6+, where you have an introduction, a literature review, 3rd the methods, 4 the findings, 5th the analysis, and 6th the conclusions. Now, if you use specific headings means it's not only one background of the problem, but you tell music and composition, and then you would say 111. What is it about? It's about notes. And 112 looks into the composition of notes and how that converges into music, right? So you have very specific headings that exactly tell what each chapter is about. And by doing so, you can immediately spot inconsistencies. Now let's look into this table of content. Do you spot and find inconsistency in the table of content, something that doesn't look right? Let's give it 3, 4, 5 seconds. Try and find it. So, if you haven't spotted it, but there's a trumpet missing, right? So why is there a trumpet missing? Can you tell? So, if the findings and the analysis of your research collect data and look into data about a trumpet and how a trumpet goes together with notes, and that is a part of the conclusions in your chapter 6, so why then can it be that it was not part of your literature review? Why didn't you consider trumpets from a literature perspective? If the data you collected shows a trumpet is of relevance, and the data also are further used for the analysis and brought together with notes, and that then tells something in the conclusions, right? So you immediately can understand what is missing and what should still be there. So it shows you as a consistency on the lower end for 4, 5, 4, 6, 2, that music, notes, and trumpets are a key part of your research, and therefore it likely should also be addressed within the literature review. Now, having said that, it might not be the case that you needed to consider it at the literature review stage, in the case that those were surprising data that you collected and then you reviewed the literature, but you saw, no, actually, it belongs to the analysis process, but not to the literature review process, because there it will be sufficiently handled from a literature perspective. So that could be a deliberate decision instead of an error or mistake, right? You did consider to include trumpets and discussion on trumpets in the literature review, but if you build up your narrative of your thesis, you realize, no, it doesn't belong there. It would fit much better into the analytics section 5.4. And therefore you present it against the background of notes, right? You cover it from a theoretical perspective, but you introduce it only in 5.4. So this is architecture of a thesis that you can be doing, and that allows you for very informed decision-making. So with this, mirroring can be a key to reduce the time to a problem understanding, time to results, time to key literature, time to methodology crafting, and time to write the thesis up. And it can help you to save wasted time. And we will get more concrete on that as we go ahead. Mirroring is a gradual process. So it's something that you need to take into account through all of the steps of your research. And this is a very early example from a thesis, March 2011. So you have the introduction chapter, you have a brief literature review. In this case, you have 2 chapters here that are dedicated to the literature review. Then you have a methodology chapter, and you have a data collection chapter already in place. So as you will see from the titles on the left and right side, they're already, or they are still very generic, right? Introduction, objectives of the world, research questions. So for mirroring, this is not really optimal because it doesn't allow you to understand through the table of content already your research. If you look into the middle, you have specific headings, and those specific headings are excellent for you to engage into mirroring. So theses always start out simple, or at least they should. So you have a very basic initial structure like this one. It shows a clear logic chain, and from there your work emerges into something that gets slowly and slowly more specific, more built up, and gets specific titles. Now in this case, you moved from something very basic like this into the next evolutionary stage, so you already bring in keywords. Keywords are crucial for you to make sense of your thesis, to know what things are about. Awareness, knowledge, attitude, social norms, personal norms. So those are very concrete words, and that can help you guiding and to further work out your thesis. So and as you get along through the research, now if you look at the left side top, this is a 4.5 years in the research journey. So it took the researcher quite a long time, but you can clearly show already the structure. But as you will see, there are a lot of question marks. So the structure is clear, but what the content is about is still not worked out concretely. And to mirror, simple tools like spreadsheets are ideally suited to compare your work. How does it look like? What are the comparative blocks? What is belonging together? You see here, color code has been used to relate sections and chapters, and you will see quite an imbalance still. Not only are there still white spots, but you also see here you have some big greenish and here not. So it's incomplete. Yeah, it's like you mirror it from one side to another. You will understand that the chapter 3, which was a data literature review chapter, and chapter 7, which was a data collection chapter, are still not matching. So it's quite obvious. And here in the lower end, you see the comparison, literature review and data. So it's a systematic way. This thesis has 3 literature review chapters and 3 data chapters. So as we go along, you see here, there are blocks that are building up. But you see on the right side, you have a lot of data that you collected that talk about energy being invisible and the abstract concept, which you didn't cover from a literature review perspective, right? So the data shows you something, and you can immediately go back and see, oh, I didn't cover that in the literature review. Then again, the question is why? Is it because it's a surprising finding? I couldn't expect that before. And if so, where would it fit in best? In the literature review, or do I take it further into the analyzer chapter? Okay. So, and this then also allows you to better discuss your work with your supervisor or any others. If you see at the left side here, highlighted in green, this is a discussion, written discussion in between the student and the supervisor on specific points, and the supervisor immediately can see, okay, it's about that. And it also allows you to spot personally. Here you see this part is actually at chapter 1. So it's something, notion and knowledge that builds up, and a very good understanding about the structure of the thesis. And in this case, you see there was a lot of literature review done in chapter 4, but it's not really matching to the data that was collected. So therefore, it must be matched. And this is very slowly starting to be built up and matched. And as you go along, you can see the thesis gets more and more connected, and you have a very good understanding what is where covered in your thesis. And this level can build up and allows you to assure that the consistency in the words you use, a consistency in the things you are looking at, a consistency in the structuring, and that you cover everything through from right introduction until the conclusions. Yeah, it's a very systematic way of work. And that informs discussion amongst the supervisor and the student, and it facilitates to be at the same page. You see, it gets more and more aligned over the specific words. You can exactly understand what the discussion is in each chapter. Now, this is at the table of content level to see how a thesis can emerge and how you can use that to discuss the work with your supervisor, and therefore to slowly build it up from introduction to conclusion. And as you see here now, what was before still question marks in the lower end, finally has become very specific names, so you can understand that the chapter 1, chapter 2 was on energy use and sustainability, chapter 3, energy use behavior, motivational barriers, and behavioral change theory and its applicability to energy efficient lifestyle. So those are 3 literature discussions that all link up and build up and are translated afterwards into the data chapter, and then also through the literature from start to end. And this then allows you to build up exactly the high-level tables to show what is covered in the thesis where. And this provides an excellent overview to anyone, including the examiner at the final viva, who then sees exactly what is belonging together in which way. So if you have that level of clarity, then I think you are safe and good for the viva. Are there any questions to this point? Okay, so this was mirroring at the table of content level. We now come to the next part where we will show that's actually that mirroring is a century-old concept and how and where it can be used. And then in the part afterwards, we will see how mirroring can be used more in the chapters. Now, let's look into mirroring. So actually, it was a student of mine, like 6 years ago, who said, yeah, Andreas, actually mirroring makes sense. You know, I love classical music and I see it there all of the time. So that's what Emmanuel told me. And then he has shown me how it builds up. And this is exactly making sense, structure, introducing. It's the same way and it works in music, apparently. So looking into that a bit further, you also can see that mirroring is used as an algorithmic approach to detect patterns. So if you are working on that end, feel free to take a look into the book on the left-hand side. And it is also used as a reverse mechanism, right? And that goes from the music. So how do I build up things? How do things belong together? It also can help you to work out parallels and antitheses, right? Tchaikovsky, work of Tchaikovsky. If you are interested to work out parallels and antitheses, take a look at that book. But it doesn't stop there. It's beyond music. It also can help you as a mean to reduce complexity. And the principle in all of the cases is the same. You work over keywords, the keywords are precise, you relate one side to the other, and you do that in a very structured and systematic manner. So there's not much magic in it, it's just pure technique. And once you get used to it, you can apply it, and it will help you in working out your research and better defining your research, but also in structuring your thesis and writing it. A mean to enhance modularity. Why is it enhancing modularity? Because as you work over keywords, as more granular it gets. And as better you understand how things relate to each other, that allows you to group things, to break things further down. So this is a very useful tool for that too. And once you are at that level, and this is how we started with a very simple image on the right side, a very basic table of content on a music-related thesis. But for any other work, it allows you to identify relations and patterns. And therefore, to support you in your scientific inquiry and to deal with complex topics and matters and to break down complexity and get a more simple understanding of your work. So those are all examples from the literature that just deal with mirroring as a concept and how it can help you in building up your thesis. So if you want to learn it a bit from a theoretical perspective, feel also free to look into that. And with this, we will now get into how you can use mirroring within the chapters itself. And we will continue from the same thesis that we had before to have here some consistency. Now, in the chapters, you can exactly see here, it talked about motivational variables and behaviors. And if you keep the table approach for working purposes, not each supervisor and examiner likes it in the thesis, but for working purposes, it can help you to quickly see which are the keywords per chapter and how can you use those. And building that further, then allows you to bring up a narrative and to assure that the narrative is consistent. Because a lot of times you see that students think something stands in a chapter, but then they use very different keywords through the discussion. That's a standard thing happening. Perhaps it's part of the development, but if you actively control yourself over that end, then you will see what fits and what still does not fit. Here you see, for example, there was a large block in blue that seemed to discuss something totally unrelated because you didn't use any of those keywords than you had before. So therefore, you can ask yourself, does it belong there or must it go into a different section? Is it something that actually is obsolete because, for example, findings didn't show anything on that end? Then you can move it out, and that will allow you to keep your dialogue consistent through. And if you want to look into the thesis, there's a source down. So also for you to check it out yourself, how that thesis was built up and how it ultimately looked. And this can be done across data and literature chapters, but also should be taken further into the introduction, methodology, and the conclusion. Yeah, so you can see it's all about habits and barriers and obstacles. So it's a very well framed discussion. And with this, we will start with going off record and open the floor for a discussion. If there are any questions, let me stop the recording.